We're here today to answer one simple but very important question. What is the best hardtail on the market today for £1,000 or less? And we've got 6 contenders all vying for the coveted title of MBR Hardtail of the Year 2022. So Al, what have we got lined up in this year's test?
Well, we've got 6 bikes, and in no particular order. We've got the Kona Mahuna, we've got the Vitas Sentia, we've got a Voodoo Bizango Pro. Over here, we've got the Specialized Rockhopper Elite 29, we've got a Trek Rosco 6, and the last bike here is the White 429.
Last time we did this test in 2019, we had a whopping 24 bikes, didn't we?
Yeah, it just gives me a tingle down my spine thinking about it. I don't think we'll ever have 24 bikes in one place again. And the year before that, we had 18. So we had basically, in 2018, we had 18 bikes in 3 categories. In 2019, we had 24 bikes over 4 categories. And then everybody knows what's happened between now and then.
Yeah, so obviously we've had COVID.
Yep.
We've had issues with supply.
Well, but massive demand.
But there's other factors involved as well, in that there's just simply not as many bikes available for £1,000 or less now, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, prices have gone up. This year we got one price point, sub 1K. But I thought it was really important this year, because we only had 6 bikes, that we split it into 2 categories. So we've got shop bought and direct sales. So the Voodoo and the Vitas are both the 2 direct sales bikes. And they're the big hitters in that category. So we've actually got what are arguably the 2 best bikes going head to head.
Great, so shall we kick off with the shop bought bikes?
Yep, let's take a look at the first 4 bikes.
So in previous years, we lumped the direct sales brands and the shop bought brands all into one category. This year, we've split them up. What kind of impact has that had?
Yeah, it's made it like a much fairer test. Like the direct sales brands, they have a huge price advantage, and the shop bought brands just basically couldn't compete. So separating them out, I think some people are comfortable having a bike turn up at their door in a box. Other people want the support that comes with the dealer, so you can walk in, you can kick the tires, try the size, know that basically if you don't know how that the gears stop working or go out of sync, you can just drop it back into the shop and they'll fix it for you.
Yeah, these are a lot of important things that you might not think about when you see like a killer price.
Especially if you're new to biking, and like they're actually quite complicated products.
The first bike we've got here, what's this one?
It's the Trek Rosco 6, and it's the anomaly in the test. There's a few things on this bike that date it. First is the 2.8-inch plus size tires on the 27.5 rims. I mean, that was a trend. It's what, 4 years ago maybe? Most brands have moved away from that and just gone straight to like 29ers with smaller, with kind of 2.3 to 2.5 inch tires. So that makes it look a little bit dated. And also this bike actually still has a direct mount front derailleur tabs just above the crank. So it's like, when's the last time you saw a front derailleur?
Well, I think we pretty much tested this bike about 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, not a lot's changed really. I mean, there's a dropper post on it and the price has gone up.
So the 27.5 inch wheels, they sound outdated, but they do bring some advantages.
Oh, totally. Because you've got a bigger tire, you've got more cushion, and the tire is quite low profile in terms of the knobs. The tire does a really good job of wrapping around stuff and not bouncing off things. So you've got tons of traction on it. So this is the heaviest bike in test. It's 15.57 kilograms. It's more than 2 kilograms heavier than the lightest bike. Some of that's the wheels, the tires, the dropper post obviously adds weight. But when you're cruising along on a fire road, it just feels effortless because those tires are just working overtime to like iron out all the little ripples, so you just keep your momentum.
Yeah, and it's a really comfortable ride, isn't it?
Comfortable, and it's pretty rowdy. There's a couple of other things that are wrong with this bike, but it's amazing how hard you can ride it, and really it's down to the tires.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think brands maybe were a little bit, especially at this price point, a little bit too quick to dispense with the plus size tires and wheels.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned though that there are some shortcomings.
There are some shortcomings, and really it's the fork. It's have a coil sprung fork. So that means that if you're a different rider weight, you're going to have to find a spring for that fork to match your rider weight. And luckily, this fork's actually oversprung, so it's quite firm. And you can see from the grease marks on the stanchions on the upper tubes of the fork, we probably didn't get more than 100 mil of travel. It's a 120 mil fork. We probably didn't get more than 100 mil of travel out of it. And what that does is actually, it keeps the geometry really stable. So the bike handles really good. You're just not using all of the travel. Whereas if it was an air sprung fork, we could just let a little bit of air out, got the travel, tuned it how we wanted it. There's also no rebound adjust on it, no rebound damping adjustment. So the fork's a bit pingy and it's noisy. I think the bushings rattle, the spring rattles, put the cable rattling inside the down tube from the internal cable routing, and the thing's it's just so noisy.
They can hear you coming a mile off, can't
Yeah, you don't
they?
need a bell. You definitely don't need a bell on this bike. I mean, I know it sounds like we're being really critical of it, but there's a couple of things that really, I was really impressed with this bike. I was impressed how hard you could ride it because of the tires. And God, I got sick of putting the seat up and down on all the other bikes using the quick releases. I mean, we did a couple of kind of semi-rainy, muddy, gritty rides, and the quick release collars they just get gunked up so quickly. The posts are getting scratched up in the frame. This bike, push the button on the lever, seat down, seat up. It just brings a whole new dimension. Like
it's a game changer, isn't it?
The dropper post is probably the best thing that's been invented in mountain biking in like 20 years.
Absolutely, and I think for every single bike on this test, apart from this one, it would be the first upgrade we'd recommend.
Yeah, and in fact, some of the companies offer it as an upgrade that you can have it, and they've all got cable routing for it, but this was the only bike that managed to deliver it. It's got 130 mil of drop. It felt a little bit ropey to begin with, but then it smoothed out. And I have to say, like the dropper post and the plus size tires, if this bike had more modern geometry, because it is quite steep, it's got a really high BB, it's like 318 millimeters, so it's maybe like 15 millimeters higher than all the other bikes. Even with that, I was really shocked at how hard I could ride it because the tires they're just like having extra suspension.
Yeah, which is a big deal when you don't have any at the back.
So in the end, we rated this bike 7.
So next up, we've got probably the biggest name in the business, really, haven't we?
Yep.
Specialized Rock Copper Elite.
29. So we've gone from the heaviest bike in test to the lightest bike in test, 13.2 kilos. It's not just the lightest bike in the shop bought category, it's the lightest bike in test.
In the overall test, yeah. And is there any particular reason why it's the lightest bike?
Well, it's got pretty skinny tires.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also got a really nice frame.
Yeah.
Like the quality, I mean, just look at it. It looks like an expensive bike. It's sleek. They've done a really good job of hiding things. There's a little kickstand mount down here. There's bosses in here probably for attaching a rack or mud guards and stuff, but you can't actually see it when you look at it. It's all really like sleek.
So it's actually a versatile bike if you wanted to use it for commuting or like gravel riding.
I think that would actually be its strength, because you've got the fast rolling tires. You've got a slightly narrow handlebar. It's light. It's got a wide range, like 11, like 51 tooth cassette. So you've got a really good gear range on it. It's got 100 mil travel, like RockShox duty fork, air sprung. It's got damping control on it. The proportions on the bike for pure mountain biking aren't perfect though. The rear end of the bike is kind of longer than the reach measurement at the front. So it's got quite a forward weight bias. So when you're going down steeper stuff, you kind of welcome the rise on the stem to keep your weight off the front a little bit. So it's not really got like a shredded style feel to the riding position, even though it actually does have quite a low seat tube on it. So it's got a nice sloping top tube and there's good standover clearance.
So it's not the most dynamic riding bike.
No, but it feels efficient, it's smooth, it's really quiet. And it has got something that none of the other bikes in this category have, and that's Shimano hydraulic brakes. They're really simple, they're really reliable, they've got a light lever action, they've got ample power, and like I've said in the review, basically, you could probably hang this bike up for a whole winter, take it out of your shed, pull the brake levers, and you know they're going to work 100%.
Yeah, the cheapest Shimano brakes just seem to be so well made.
They're impressive.
Maintenance free, yeah.
Couple of other things on this bike that I liked. It's got like a full rubberized chainstay protector, so that definitely adds to the silence. The contact points are good. I mean, Specialized do a good job. I mean, the saddle's really good. The grips are good. But like as we've seen with all of the bikes, apart from the white, I had to cut the seat post down so I could drop them low enough for descending. And on this bike, the seat post got scored up really badly, just because the frame wasn't finished properly inside. But again, it's from a dealer. if you go in there and go, hey, look at my seat post, I mean, hopefully maybe even the mechanic when they assemble the bike, they'll spot that, they'll ream it before you score the hell out of your seat post. Yeah.
So a couple of things I can see that are maybe not what we're used to on the more high-end bikes. It's only got a quick release fork.
Yeah.
And it's got a square tapered bottom bracket, isn't it?
Yeah. All of the bikes, apart from the white in this category, had square tapered cranks.
And remind me why those are inferior to modern two-piece.
It's just the interface. If you don't stay on top of it and keep them tight, they basically, because it's a taper, they kind of work off the taper, and once they get baggy, as it were, you have to replace the crank arms.
Yeah, it's expensive.
You could probably get a setup for about 80 quid with a bottom bracket and a two-piece chain set. So these are three-piece. So you have a bottom bracket with a spindle and then two crank arms bolted onto it. You could switch to a two-piece chain set for about £80.
Yeah. And also with the two-piece, you get external bearings, which are bigger and last longer, don't they?
Yeah, it's definitely a better system. Yeah. And that's the system that you see you see it only on the white, and then obviously the two direct sales bikes, they have that. Yeah. It's a good package. It's like one of the better packages that we've had from Specialized actually in this test. And I think just maybe with like some meatier tires would really help this bike. You could probably keep the faster rolling tire in the rear, but you want something a little bit more meaty up front, because when we were shooting the photos and out testing and stuff, I found I had to do a lot of like kind of micro corrections. You'd lean up, you'd set up into a turn, and then mid-turn you'd be kind of like correcting to like counter the understeer. Yeah. And I think just having a proper front tire would give you a lot more confidence to push this bike, and then you could take advantage of the fact that it's really lightweight.
So it's got the bones of a good mountain bike, hasn't it?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it comes in 5 frame sizes. And if you're in between, I'd suggest going up a frame size, because like I said, it's got a reasonably short seat tube, and you just get that extra bit of length in the front, which will help offset the longer rear end.
Great. So that, what was the rating on that?
8 out of 10.
So White pretty much created the blueprint of the modern hardcore hardtail, didn't they? Yeah. So how did this new 429 get on?
Almost won the test. It was closely fought between this and the Kona. Like White's, like you said, trail hardtails, it's their bread and butter. The 429 platform, because it's a penny shy of like £1,000, it uses a slightly older frame design. You know how White has like the versions? This is an older version of the frame that's been trickled down to meet the price point. It's a really good quality frame, but there's a few things on it that, again, date it slightly. One is the longer seat tube, and also the tire clearance. It's got a 2.25 tire in the rear, and there's not a ton of tire clearance on this bike, and it would have been better with the Forecaster, with the Maxxis Forecaster front and rear, just to get a little bit more cushion, a little bit more grip. This one's fast rolling, but there's not a lot of traction, and there's not a lot of cushioning in it.
And the seat tube's a problem because...
Well, it's just standover height. You know, it makes it taller. If you want to put a dropper in there too, at some point, which you will want to do, because we talked about how amazing they are, it means you're kind of be like, if the seat tube's really high, you're kind of restricted with how much drop you can have. I just think this frame would benefit from being a little bit lower in general, sort of lower in the seat tube, lower in the top tube, just to give you a little bit more confidence, because it really feels high underneath you when you're riding on it. I will say though, this was the only bike where we didn't have to cut the seat post down to get the seat to go up and down fully. So obviously, and it's got a really good quick release on it. It's not got a brass piece here, so it didn't get gunked up. It's forward facing. Little details like that. It's a UK brand. They know how this bike's going to get ridden. Yeah, and it's a nice looking frame. I mean, it's attractive, isn't it? It's really good quality. Cable routing's really neat on it. It's got these kind of like snake stays, as it were. And like they add a little bit of extra like heel clearance when you're riding, when you're pedaling with your heels, if you've got bigger feet. But also they make the stays longer. So they take a longer path from here to here and here. So they have a little bit more compliance. This bike's got a really nice feel to it. And I think the compliance in the rear, combined with it's got a short stem, it's got a nice wide bar, good grips. It's got a 120 mil fork on this bike. So it's a 120 duty, whereas the Kona and the Specialized both have 100 mil duties. And I think it's quick release. So I think just stretching the platform a little bit more, you're asking more from the fork. And I actually found that on the 100 mil travel forks, the geometry was more stable. And we've always sort of said, yeah, 120, 130 is the max for a hardtail. When the price comes down, maybe 100 mil is actually the max because you don't have the same level of damping control with the cheaper forks.
Yeah. But they've one-upped the specializing, like I can see they've got two-piece cranks.
I mean, the two-piece crank's amazing. I mean, that's in terms of reliability, your crank arms aren't going to fall off, basically, if you forget to tighten them. The price you pay for that, though, it's got a sun race, 1146 tooth cassette, so you don't have as wide a range, and the shifting's just not, it's a bit more pingy and tinny and not as precise as the Shimano equipped bikes, the full Shimano equipped bikes.
Yeah.
That sounds like a lot of criticisms on this bike, but it's just we have really high expectations from White because, like you said, they set the blueprint for trail hardtails. And this bike's just showing its age a little bit. And to be fair, like normally White was the brand that would come second next to the Sales Direct brands, but in this test, it actually got beaten by another shop bought brand.
Okay.
With just as much or more experience in making hardtails.
Yeah. So what did this rate then?
It got a 9 out of 10.
Okay. So we were just talking about the White maybe needing like a lower top tube and more standover. Now this bike looks like it's got loads of clearance.
Comes with a standard.
Yeah.
Also comes with the 66.5 degree head angle, 465 reach, so it's got the slackest head angle, the longest reach, it's got the longest wheelbase. It's the bike here that feels most like a modern trail bike.
So it's the most up-to-date bike here in terms of geometry.
Yeah.
How does that translate to the ride quality?
Well, it's got really neutral handling. The minute I jumped on the Kona, I was just like, oh yeah, I know where I am. Like I'm centered on the bike, it feels really neutral. You're not having to kind of like, on the Specialized, you're kind of having to ride a bit nervous off the back. You know, and the White just kind of felt kind of tall underneath you. The Trek's in a league of its own just in terms of shape and feel, so like it wasn't really in the mix. This bike, you just basically drop into a trail, carve the corners, manual through sections, you just feel really neutral on the bike. It's just easy to ride, and that's exactly what you want. You want a bike that gives you the confidence to push. It helps too that this bike has Maxxis Forecasters, they're not as predictable as some of like Maxxis high-end tires, but they've got front and rear. There's no sort of concession to like semi-slicks or rolling speed here. The bike's got good traction, so because you're centered and balanced on the bike, and because the tires are the same front and rear, even when you start to drift or you kind of lose control a little bit, one end's not kind of like chasing the other, as it were. It kind of happens together and happens smoothly, so that's a really big bonus.
So it's basically the most aggressive bike here in terms of how you can ride it.
Yeah, totally. Like aggressive as in it'll suit the rider that wants to ride more aggressively, and for the rider that doesn't want to ride as aggressively, they'll feel safer.
Yeah, so win-win.
Yeah, it's totally a win-win. It's got the slackest head angle, but it's also only got 100 mil travel fork. So you don't get big swings in the geometry, and I really think the 100 mil limit on these bikes is what makes it, because the bike you hit corners, you go down sections. When you drop into something, you don't have as much sag. The fork doesn't kind of compress as much. Yes, it's not as good as the forks that when we move on to the direct sales bikes, but I think at this price point, 100 mil travel duty is a pretty good fork because you can adjust the spring rate, you can adjust the damping. It's got a little lockout on there, a turnkey lockout on there if you want to kind of firm it up for a bit of towpath riding or whatever else you're doing on the bike. But this is not a dual purpose bike. It's definitely a really good mountain bike. There's a few little things about it. Again, it's got a square taper chain set.
Yep.
You know, but like I said, if you can get like a replacement for about 80 pounds, this bike costs, it's 948 pounds, 99, I think that's the price off the top of my head. So you've got a little bit of leeway over the White and the Trek. Both cost the best part of 1,000 pounds. Yeah. So like, it's kind of like you could replace the chain set at some point and still not be like massively out of pocket.
Yeah. And the rest of the components?
The rest of the components really good. Bars wide, it's got a good shape, stem length, matches the proportions of the frame. It's got a comfortable saddle. Again, the seat post goes up and down real smooth. It's got a 11-speed Dior with the full range cassette again, so you've got the gears for climbing, and again, that kind of, it's got a longer chainstay on it. So when you're climbing, you don't have to sit on the nose of the saddle again, you just sit really neutral, and you know, like that helps you weight the front end of the bike, like in corners and when climbing. all of the bikes apart from the Specialized have Tektro brakes in this category. And this one's got Tektro brakes too, but it's actually got Shimano rotors.
Okay.
And they felt better. I don't know if it's just the pads with the rotor or what. I don't know if it made a big difference, but like in terms of why the difference is there, but they definitely feel better. They don't feel as good as the Shimano brakes on the Specialized, but they're definitely better because they've got the Shimano rotors.
Okay, so it's a sort of halfway house.
It is a halfway house,
Yeah.
and it works totally.
So there are a few niggles with the spec,
Yeah,
but the overall ride was still really strong.
it's exemplary.
Okay.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the niggles with the spec. So because the frame is so good and the shape is so good and your fork's really good and your tires are good, they've got the fundamentals absolutely dialed. So those little niggles with the spec, I mean, things like it doesn't have lock-on grips. It needs lock-on grips, but that's going to cost you what, 15 pounds, 20 pounds to put a set of lock-on grips in it? Maybe the dealer would throw you a set in if you really just said, hey, look, I need some proper grips. It's got routing for a dropper post. This is actually a bike that you can upgrade as your riding progresses. And because the ride quality was the best in test, I mean, that's why we're testing them.
Yep.
If you just want to buy the best spec bike, you don't need us to review them. You just look at the spec page and compare them. But we test them because it's the ride quality that's fundamental. And this bike had the standout ride quality from the very first ride in this test.
Right.
So yeah, I have no reservations about giving this bike our Hardtail of the Year award.
And that's a perfect 10 out of 10.
Yep, totally. Time to turn the tables.
Sure is.
So although we got a smaller test this year, I mean, one of the carryovers that we thought was really important to keep was that each category had a specific tester. And like, just to explain to the viewers that, that was really important when we had those massive tests before, because there's no way you can test 24 bikes in a month.
Yeah, so I'd like to say that testing 2 bikes was only half the work of testing 4 bikes, but actually these 2 were really, really close and quite difficult to separate, which also means that both of them are really good, and I think all of our viewers would be happy on either of them.
Yeah. Both previous test winners.
Well, exactly.
Yeah, it's the head-to-head of the best bikes that have been in Hardtail of the Year.
Yeah, both of them have a really strong pedigree. So this Sentier was the winner of the last test we did in 2019. But, and it's £50 cheaper than the bike we tested in 2019. But don't let that fool you, because all of the prices of the Sentiers have gone up, but the range is wide enough that we could drop down a level and get a slightly cheaper model. So this is
the entry-level bike now.
Entry-level Sentier. And choice is something that's really represented strongly in the Vitus range. So you not only got this 29er here, but you've got a 27.5-inch version if that's what you want. 4 frame sizes for the 27.5 bike and 3 for the 29er. And then you've also got several different specs as well. So there really is a Sentier for everyone out there, basically.
So 29 front and rear. What's the fork travel on this bike?
Fork travel on this is 130 mil.
Yeah.
It's a RockShox Recon. It looks like it's got alloy upper tubes.
Yeah, because it's got the kind of
because
black.
they're black.
Yeah.
But actually they're steel.
Yeah.
So that adds a bit of weight.
Yeah.
And they're also 32 mil diameter rather than the bigger 35s. I would say they're a big step up from the Judy.
Okay.
They have a bolt-through axle. That's going to add a lot of stiffness.
Yeah, totally.
They've got good adjustable damping on there, and these actually worked pretty good. They're very free. They move.
They're super supple.
Super supple. You can get all the travel. In fact, probably you can get all the travel a little bit too easily.
Yeah.
So you get those kind of big oscillations in geometry. So in the end, we ended up overinflating the fork to try and cut that down a little bit, keep the geometry a little bit more stable, and we lowered the stem to keep our sort of
ride height the same. Ride height. It was a good compromise, though, wasn't it? Like, I remember thinking it definitely made the bike feel more stable. You felt more confident when you started going downhill because the front would just sit up a little bit higher.
Totally.
Yeah.
But the big problem with this fork is that the bushings were loose. So There's play in the fork, very slight, but it feels like you have like a loose headset or something.
Yeah. And this is a brand new bike.
It's absolutely brand new.
Stock.
So you just get a little bit of rattle as you're descending and as you're braking over sort of choppy stuff. And it's just a little bit disconcerting.
Yeah.
It's not terrible, but when you compare it to the Voodoo, it's definitely a step down in performance.
Yeah, and I think it's really noticeable in this bike too, because it had really dynamic handling. It had really good tires. So you could push this bike, and then that kind of makes you think, oh, what's wrong? Like, there's this kind of like annoyance at the front of the bike.
Totally.
Which detracts from the ride quality.
Yeah. So you sort of mentioned it there. It's worth reiterating. The tires also added to the comfort because they're big volume. Yeah. They've got a lot of tread. They're
good rubber too.
Really good rubber. Yeah. So they add a lot to the comfort. They really smoothed out the trail. And then also the frame quality as well. And also this bike came tubeless as well. So that's going to help in terms of being able to run, slightly lower pressures, and the tire's going to conform a bit better to the terrain.
The thing is as well, like, the Magic Mary and the Nobby Nick, the modern Nobby Nick, they're good tires.
And also, you add that into the frame itself, which is, it's quite compact, and like you say, it's a really agile,
it's really
fun
easy,
bike
easy
to ride.
Maneuver.
This frame is the same as we tested 3 years ago, and it's probably starting to show its age a little bit in terms of the seat tube is a little bit too long, the BB height is maybe a little bit too high. Yeah. They could definitely lengthen the bike because the reach is quite short. And because the seat tube is high, you can't just go up a frame size if you want the length.
Get the length.
So if Vitas gave this a little bit of a geometry tweak, a little refresh, then it would be, and that's free. Like, geometry's free.
Yeah, totally.
So they could do that. They could really make this bike stand out and take it to the next level. So
I don't want to talk about the next bike before we get to it, but like, they put together an incredible package, like in terms of the components. And again, I think this bike has the Sunrace, the 1146 tooth cassette that we had on one of the other bikes, and you definitely notice the more kind of like the shifting's not quite, it doesn't have the gear range, and the shifting's just not quite as like sharp and precise. So that's another little thing to
black mark.
Like it's not a terrible cassette by any means. It's just that when another bike comes with a slightly better one, that gives it an advantage.
Yeah, when you ride them back to back, you can tell the difference. Yeah. It makes, because the largest sprocket isn't as big, it does make it harder on the climbs.
Yeah, especially if you're heavier or not as fit, it's like...
Exactly. Yeah. If you wanted to upgrade it, you're going to run into slightly issues with having to buy extra bits. And then also the brakes weren't as good as the...
So they're not Tektro on this bike either, they're Clark's.
The rear lever was very slow to return,
wasn't it? Yeah.
And the lever shape itself is not that comfortable. And because there's not tons of power, you've got to pull them pretty hard.
It's not like the brakes don't work. It's just that compared to the Shimano brakes on the Voodoo, they're nothing like as good.
Yeah, totally. And one area where I think this bike also scores above the Voodoo is that it's got really good wide rims on there as well, which
the WTB rims,
Yep, good branded rims, and they really help sort of broaden the footprint of those tires. So again, that helps with the comfort. But as a package, it's a really fun bike. If we think ultimately we want a bike to put a smile on our face when we ride it, this did that every time.
So Danny, this is actually a brand new Bizango at a brand new price point.
Yeah, so I think this is actually the 3rd generation Bizango.
Oh wow. I remember riding the first one.
Yeah.
So the frame's been revised.
Yep.
Launched this year. Yep. And this is the Pro version.
That's the Pro. So there's a Bizango, like entry-level Bizango, which is 750. Yeah. So if this is a little bit too rich for you, then you can save a couple of £100.
That's a big looking fork on there.
Yeah, so this is RockShox 35, so 35 referring to the upper tube diameter. And this is actually an e-bike approved fork. So it's built strong enough to fit on a 25 kilo e-bike. So it's definitely sturdy enough for a 13 kilo, hardtail. So it's really stiff. It's totally upgradable if you to buy this bike and invest in it. You want to change some things and improve the performance down the line. You can change the damper if you want. You can fit tokens, volume spacers into the fork if you want to change the way that the air spring works.
In fact, we actually we cracked that fork open, didn't we? When we were testing it, because we were struggling a little bit so it's a 130 mil fork. Yep. We were struggling to use, we weren't even close to using all of the travel.
No, we were getting about 110 mil in the end. Which wasn't actually a bad thing, because again, we've been talking about this. It keeps the geometry quite consistent. And I mean, what we think was happening in there is that it's quite a basic damper, although because when I cracked that open, I was like, there's no volume spacers. Yeah, there were no volume spacers in there. So we couldn't take any out to make it more linear and use up more travel. So we think that the damper is basically the hydraulic fluid. When it has to move really fast, when it hits a big bump, it just can't cope, the circuit can't cope, and it's kind of locks up. Because you can get full travel when you're just in the car park. It doesn't lock up in the sense that there's a harshness. It's just like it ramps up to a point where it limits the travel, because the fork actually it feels really stable. It's stable, it's supple. So it's perfect for this bike. And actually, when it gets to that 110 mil, I mean, whatever hits the front wheel is going to hit the back wheel, and you're going to feel through the soles of your feet anyway. So there's no point in completely ironing out. And I think having the slightly stiffer chassis is really good, because on a hardtail, you do ride the fork a lot. You do. And that's because that's where your grip and where your suspension is. So I noticed they've actually mixed and matched tire treads and sizes. Yeah, so we've got a High Roller 2 on the front, 2.3, and we've got a Recon on the back, 2.25. Yeah, so slightly narrower in the rear with more low profile tread, sort of maybe a little bit geared towards like pedaling efficiency. Yeah, it's a really fast rolling combo, and like this bike it feels amazing when you're trying to cover ground. So it's a great sort of combo for like marathon riding or gravel riding or combinations of different terrains. It's very versatile, isn't it? Very versatile. But if you're looking for something more aggressive, then like for one, there's not a lot of cushioning. And again, it's got the narrower rims and the smaller rear tire. So like you could almost on this bike, I think, take the front tire off, put it on the back, and go with like a 2.5 on the front or something like that. Yeah, like it'd be the simplest, cheapest fix or upgrade for this bike. It's not really a fix, it's an upgrade. Depending on how you want to ride it. Exactly. And you can pick up one for like 40 quid, like a really good front tire. It doesn't have to be like a top end Maxxis. Don't have to get Maxxis. There's lots of other brands doing good stuff. It comes with tubes. Make it tubeless, that's going to help. That's going to get rid of some weight as well. But as it stands there, like you could do an XC race on it quite happily. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's really. I thought it was really versatile. Yeah, and it was mainly because we were riding against the Vitus that it highlighted that. If it was on its own, you just sort of ride around it. Yeah. It feels like in terms of the riding position on the bike, it felt bigger. Yeah, so it is bigger. It's like 10 mil bigger in the reach. But also the seat tube is a bit steeper as well, so you're more over the BB. So a little bit more forward on the bike. Yeah, better for climbing. Basically, the whole bike feels like it sort of opens yourself out into a slightly flatter, more efficient position. Your chest, you can breathe really easily. And it's the sort of fast rolling tires as well. Just means it really climbs like smooth climbs. I mean, it's got the gearing for climbing too, isn't it? It's got 12 speed. Yeah, which is amazing. Absolutely amazing. Yeah, because it's a wide range cassette. Like the shifting is what's the advantage of having just for anyone that's watching this, and like some bikes have got 10 speed, others have got 11. What's the advantage of having a 12 speed cassette? Well, this one particularly, you've got a 51 tooth there, so it's going to be a bigger, so it's going to be large sprocket. A lighter, easier gear for climbing. You can spin rather than having to get outside and grind. So you're using less energy effectively. You can be more efficient with your energy. And all of the ratios will be slightly closer together. Yeah, so the jumps won't be as big between gears. Yeah, and it's got two-piece Shimano cranks up front as well, which have been fantastic cranks for years. They've always been one of our recommended cranks. So that's really good. The bike is silent as well. Like it's one of the quiet, I think it's probably the quietest bike we had on test. probably, certainly among the Vitus and this. So, you know, when you're descending, there's not like all this clatter and stuff distracting you. You can just be nice and smooth and precise. And
there's no big like rubber chainstay protector, but it's got dropped chainstays. So the chainstays sit pretty much equidistant from the top run of chain and the bottom run of chain. So there's basically no chain slap from it. When you combine it with the clutch derailleur, which all the bikes have now, which is great. I was really impressed with how quiet it was.
It's a simple but really smart solution. And it's, I can't really overstate how much difference it makes on the trail when you've got a silent bike.
It's pretty trendy to have internal cable routing because it kind of makes the bikes look really clean. This is all external. I think that helps it make it more quiet too.
Yeah, well, the advantage is it's firmly zip tied to the tubes. It can't rattle around. So, you know, it might look a little bit sort of old school, but it works. The only thing I'd say is probably at the front here, the rear brake hose has been rubbing on the crown of the fork. So
it'll rub into that
pretty quickly. Rub into that. So when you buy this bike, I would work out a way of solving that, whether it's rerouting the cable around the outside or zip tying it away or whatever it is. But so you can also add a dropper, obviously, into this, and that cable would go down the down tube as well, but then into the seat tube, the back of the seat tube. So
that's not going to rattle either.
No. And I'd recommend that because that seat clamp is one of the worst ones that we've had here.
Yeah, and the thing is, this is a good bike that you can ride hard, and you can take it to trails where like it's not just a towpath bike.
No.
So you are dropping your seat a lot, and you're basically dropping it for the descents, you're raising it for the climbs, and like round here, you're doing that every 30 seconds.
Yeah.
It's pain.
It is.
Pain in the ass, especially when it gets gritty.
It really gets boring quite quickly, especially if you're riding with people who have got dropper posts.
Yeah. One of the things that really like swung it for me though, again, we come back to the Shimano Brakes.
Yep, they were awesome. You know, they're the 4-finger, but you only use 1 finger, so you've got such a long lever.
They're like big moto levers or something, aren't they?
That gives you so much leverage and control, so you can really modulate them. Even though it's got a really small 160mm rotor on the back, you've got plenty of power. You could increase the size of that if you wanted to, but like really ample stopping power. And the thing was, it was controllable. So that's really important.
Yeah, the modulations, the feel and the modulation's really good on it, even with the kind of sketchier rear tire.
Yeah, totally. One other thing I want to sort of mention on the spec is that it's got a superb WTB Volt saddle. And, you know, when you're on a hardtail, you're going to be, well...
It's the only thing that's separating your ass from the vibrations.
You're sitting down, if you're on the flat and you're cruising or whatever, it makes such a difference to the overall comfort.
It's really good. Like the grips were good. The bar position was like, we rolled it forward a little bit to kind of stop, because it had a little bit of down sweep on it, sort of thing. But we got it in a position where we really liked it. The stem's a good length. You're right. The saddle was like, it's like a standout component on it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And you know, when you were talking earlier about the frame, you know, the ride quality in the frame being super important. And on this bike, it's a very upgradable frame. Like everything's modern standards. It's got a tapered head tube. It's got a threaded BB. It's got a bolt-through rear axle, boost spacing. So everything on this bike can be upgraded. You know, you can keep hold of this bike for however long you want as you get better as a rider, and it will still be there with you, and the performance will grow with you.
It was a pretty closely fought head-to-head test, but in the end, the Voodoo Bazango Pro was the bike that came out on top. So 10 out of 10?
10 out of 10. Yep, move over Vitus Sentier, you know, the throne now belongs to the Voodoo.
Yeah.
But
and I mean, they'll be back.
They will be back.
They won't take that.
I don't doubt it.
Sitting down
for 1 minute. Absolutely. Totally. So this time next year, we'll see what they've got. So that wraps up our MBR Hardtail of the Year test for 2022. And we've got 2 outstanding winners, the Voodoo Bazango Pro and the Kona Mahuna, both of which are worthy of your hard-earned cash.
So all that remains for me to say, we'll be back next year with 4 price points and 24 hardtails.
Are you sure?
No.